The Wind River had taken lives before, but that night, it gave one back. Under a bruised Wyoming sky, a storm was tearing the valley apart when a lone figure in a soaked jacket plunged into the raging current. Former Navy SEAL Jack Mercer wasn't looking for redemption. He'd buried that long ago. But when he saw a woman's pale hand break the surface, instinct overpowered memory. Moments later, he dragged her lifeless body onto the muddy shore, unaware that saving her would pull him into a truth far darker than the river itself. Her name was Hannah Cole, a widow on the run, branded a thief, hunted by the man who murdered her husband. Together with his battle-scarred German shepherd, Ranger, Jack would face a town that believed lies more easily than justice. But the real danger wasn't just the man chasing her. It was the ghosts both of them had carried for years. If you believe no storm lasts forever, comment where you're watching from, or just write amen for everyone still fighting their way out of the water. The Wind River Valley smelled of pine and thawing snow that afternoon. That raw mix of earth and cold water that only Wyoming could make. The spring storm had passed at dawn, leaving the air clear and sharp enough to sting the lungs. Jack Mercer stood by the fence line of his small cabin, hammering in a loose board. His hands were calloused, darkened by years of sun and work. At 40, he was still built like the soldier he used to be. Broad shoulders, narrow waist, every movement measured and efficient. The kind of man shaped by discipline and silence. His short-cropped brown hair had begun to gray at the temples, and a faint scar ran from his right cheek down to his jaw, a reminder of the last mission he never talked about. He didn't talk much at all these days. The locals in the nearby town of Lander called him the Ghost Vet. He rarely came in except for supplies and dog food. Some said he was running from something. Others said he just wanted peace. Both were true. At his feet, Ranger, a 7-year-old German shepherd, trotted along the fence with quiet alertness. His coat was a blend of sable and black, thick from the cold. One ear stood straight while the other tilted slightly. A small imperfection from a mission wound years ago. His amber eyes tracked every sound. The flap of a crow's wings, the groan of the pines, the distant rush of the river. Ranger wasn't just a dog. He was what the Navy had called a partner. They'd served together through 2 deployments, clearing buildings, tracking explosives, saving lives. Ranger had pulled men from burning vehicles. Jack had once taken a bullet to drag Ranger out of one. They shared the same scars, even if one of them wore fur. Now, they lived in quiet exile together, a man and a dog who had both seen too much. Jack finished nailing the last board and wiped his hands on his jeans. The sky to the west still carried the bruised hue of the storm. He glanced at Ranger. "You smell rain coming again, bud?" Ranger's ears perked, then he stiffened, nose high. A low growl built in his chest. Not fear, but instinct. Jack frowned. "What is it?" The dog bolted toward the river. Jack dropped his hammer. "Ranger!" He ran after him, boots thudding on wet ground, the smell of mud rising as he sprinted down the slope. The roar of the river grew louder. A wild, endless rumble of water colliding with rock. The Wind River was swollen from snowmelt, brown and furious. Fallen branches and debris churned in its current like wreckage from a forgotten war. Then he saw it. At first, just a flash of movement, something dark tumbling in the water. Then, the shape became clearer. A woman. She was tangled against a half-submerged log, arms flailing weakly, her head dipping under the surface again and again. Jack didn't think. Training took over. He stripped off his jacket and gun belt, tossed them on the ground, and kicked off his boots. The cold water hit like a punch when he dove in, a shock that stole his breath, but not his resolve. The current tried to drag him down, but Jack fought through it, every muscle remembering what it meant to survive. "Hold on!" he shouted, though he doubted she could hear. Ranger barked from the shore, pacing the edge, eyes locked on his partner. Jack reached the log and grabbed for the woman's arm. Her skin was ice cold, her movements sluggish, her long, dark hair plastered across her face, and her torn flannel shirt clung to her frame. With a deep breath, Jack ducked under, his fingers searching beneath the water until he found her leg trapped between branches. He wrenched it free, lungs burning, and kicked upward. They broke the surface together. She coughed violently, half-conscious, whispering something he couldn't make out. Jack held her tight against his chest as he fought his way back toward shore. When his knees finally hit gravel, he collapsed beside her, gasping. The roar of the river filled the air like applause from a cruel audience. The woman's face was pale, lips blue, a faint bruise blooming on her cheekbone. He tilted her chin up and checked her breathing. It was shallow but steady. Water trickled from her mouth as she coughed again, her eyes fluttering open, startlingly green, like moss in shadow. "You're safe," Jack said quietly. His voice was rough, lower than usual, as if unused to comfort. She blinked, confused, her gaze darting from his face to Ranger standing over her, ears forward, watching. "Where?" she whispered, but her voice was too faint to finish. "Near Wind River," Jack said. "You're okay now." She tried to sit, but her body trembled violently. When she moved, he saw the rip in her jeans, the blood from a cut on her leg, and the dirt under her nails. Her clothes weren't made for the woods, not for weather like this. She didn't look like a hiker or a local. Jack slipped his arm behind her shoulders. "You need warmth. My cabin's close." The woman flinched at his touch, eyes wide with sudden fear. "No, please. Don't take me back to town." Jack paused. The fear in her voice was raw, deeper than just shock. Something about it made him stop asking questions. "I'm not taking you to town," he said softly. "Just somewhere warm. That's all." For a moment, she searched his face, a desperate look, as if trying to read the truth behind the stubble and weathered lines. Finally, she nodded, her strength failing. Jack lifted her in his arms, surprised at how light she felt, all bone and trembling breath. Ranger led the way up the muddy path, occasionally glancing back, as if making sure his human was still following. The cabin came into view, a sturdy one-room structure of pine logs and stone, perched above the riverbank. Smoke still curled from the chimney. Jack pushed the door open with his shoulder and stepped inside. The warmth hit them immediately. The scent of wood smoke and coffee filled the air. He laid the woman gently on the worn couch near the fireplace, then threw 2 more logs onto the fire. Ranger settled near the hearth, shaking water from his fur before lying down, eyes still on the stranger. Jack fetched a blanket and wrapped it around her. "You'll be all right," he muttered, more to himself than her. She stirred, trying to speak, but her voice cracked. "Thank you." Jack nodded. "Don't try to talk." He moved to the small stove, poured water into a pot, and set it to heat. The normal, quiet tasks steadied him. When he turned back, her eyes were half closed, her breathing even. She was safe for now. He sat down in the chair across from her, elbows on his knees. watching the firelight play across her face. She was maybe 30, maybe younger. It was hard to tell beneath exhaustion and dirt. Whoever she hadn't come to the river by accident. Ranger lifted his head, ears twitching toward the window where the river's murmur never stopped. Jack glanced out at the gray horizon. The storm had passed, but something told him this wasn't over. The river had given him a stranger tonight. And Jack Mercer, a man who wanted no one, no stories, and no attachments, suddenly had both. The smell of damp wool and wood smoke filled the small cabin when the woman woke. Her eyelids fluttered open like someone coming up from underwater, her body still trembling with the memory of the current. The fire glowed low in the hearth, and somewhere close a kettle hissed. Jack Mercer sat in the chair across from her, elbows on his knees, the same posture he'd kept for hours. His face was carved with fatigue. Lines of worry deepened under the rough stubble on his jaw. He looked like he hadn't slept in years. His flannel shirt was still damp from the rescue, and his hands, scarred and steady, held a mug of coffee he hadn't touched. When she stirred, Ranger was the first to move. The German shepherd rose from his place beside the couch, tail giving a single sweep against the floorboards before he stepped closer. His coat shimmered in the firelight, the sable and black pattern sharp against the cabin's dim glow. His amber eyes fixed on her face, calm but watchful, as if assessing whether she was friend or threat. Jack spoke softly. "Easy, boy." Then to her, "You're awake." She blinked, confused, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders. Her clothes, torn flannel shirt, soaked jeans, were draped over a chair by the fire. She wore one of Jack's old shirts now, the sleeves hanging loose around her small wrists. "Where am I?" she whispered, her voice hoarse. "About a mile from the Wind River," he said. "You nearly drowned. My dog found you." She looked toward Ranger. He'd sat down again, chest tall, ears pricked, watching her every move. Something about his steady gaze seemed to calm her. She managed a faint smile. "Good boy," she murmured. Jack handed her a mug of water. "Drink slow." She took it with trembling fingers. The warmth seeped into her palms, and color began to return to her cheeks. For the first time, Jack saw her clearly. Maybe early 30s, maybe younger, hard to tell under the exhaustion. Her face was striking in a quiet way, framed by dark hair that fell in tangled waves to her shoulders. A bruise purpled along her jawline, another near her collarbone where the shirt gaped slightly. He didn't ask how they got there. Not yet. "Name's Jack Mercer," he said after a while. She hesitated, then whispered, Hannah Cole." Jack nodded once. "You from around here, Hannah?" Her eyes flickered toward the window, the reflex of someone looking for exits. "No, passing through." He didn't press. He'd met enough people running from something to recognize the signs. The tight voice, the half-truths, the way she avoided mirrors. Outside, the wind howled across the valley, shaking the cabin walls. Ranger went to the door, sniffed, then settled again beside her, laying his head on his paws. "You should rest," Jack said. "That water took a lot out of you." She nodded, but didn't lie down. Her gaze lingered on the flames, lost somewhere far away. As the evening deepened, the storm returned, a cold drizzle tapping on the roof. Jack busied himself making soup, more to fill the silence than because she'd eat much. He'd learned to live with silence. She hadn't. Every creak made her flinch. He caught her studying him once, eyes darting to the scar on his cheek, then down to his forearms marked by old burns and rope lines. "You're military," she said quietly. "Was." Her lips parted as if she wanted to ask more, but she didn't. She just nodded and looked away. When the clock struck 10, Hannah's exhaustion won. She lay back against the couch, closing her eyes. Jack took the chair by the fire, reading an old field manual for the 100th time, while Ranger dozed between them. Sometime past midnight, she began to murmur. The sound pulled Jack from half-sleep. Her forehead gleamed with sweat, her breath quick and shallow. Fever. He got up, wet a cloth, and pressed it to her skin. Then she whispered, not in pain, but in fear. "Please, don't." Jack froze. He'd heard that tone before. Not in English, not even in this country, but in places where kindness had long since been forgotten. He started to pull the blanket higher over her shoulders when her eyes suddenly opened. They were glassy, unfocused, but they found him. "If I undress," she said, her voice trembling, "will you stay?" For a heartbeat, the world went utterly still. The only sound was the crackle of the fire and Ranger's quiet breathing. There was no seduction in her words, only the muscle memory of survival. Jack stepped back slightly, his voice barely above a whisper. "You don't owe me anything. Not now. Not ever." Something inside her broke. A small, broken sound left her throat, and tears slid down her temples. He didn't move closer, just stood by the fire until the tremors in her breath slowed. When she finally slept again, he sat back down, staring into the flames until they blurred. Ranger shifted, resting his head on Jack's boot, a silent understanding between old soldiers. Near dawn, the fever broke. The gray light that crept through the window showed her sleeping peacefully for the first time. Jack moved quietly, picking up her clothes to hang them near the fire. As he did, something small and metallic fell from the pocket. A silver locket, tarnished and old. He crouched and picked it up. Inside was a tiny photograph of a toddler, maybe 2 years old, with Hannah's eyes. The back was engraved with a single word: Mason. Jack felt a heaviness settle in his chest. He closed the locket carefully and set it on the table beside her. Whatever she was running from, it wasn't just fear, it was loss. Outside, the river murmured beneath the thinning mist. Ranger stretched, tail thumping once as if reminding Jack that morning had come. Jack looked at the woman sleeping on his couch, at the locket glinting beside her, and at the dog who'd brought her into his world. He didn't know who she really was or what trouble might follow. He only knew this: for the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about leaving. The river had carried something broken to his doorstep, and somehow he couldn't bring himself to let it drift away again. 3 days after the rescue, Hannah's bruises had darkened, but her fever was gone. The color had returned to her face, though she still moved carefully, like someone afraid the world might strike her for being too loud. Jack Mercer stood by the truck, loading a first aid kit and a thermos of coffee. The morning light cut through the pines, scattering gold over the muddy trail. Ranger hopped into the back seat, his sharp ears scanning the horizon as though guarding his post. "You sure you're up for this?" Jack asked, closing the door. Hannah nodded, tightening the borrowed flannel jacket around her shoulders. "Just the clinic. I'll be fine." He didn't argue. but the crease between his brows deepened. The road to Lander wound along the Wind River, past cattle ranches and stretches of open land still wet from spring melt. Hannah stared out the window the whole way, silent, her fingers twisting the locket she always kept near her heart. Jack didn't push for conversation. He'd learned that trust wasn't earned through words. The town of Lander was small. One main street with a gas station, a diner, a hardware store, and the county clinic sitting at the edge of town, the kind of place where everyone's business was public property. Jack parked by the clinic. "I'll wait outside," he said. Hannah hesitated. "You don't have to." "I know." He gave a faint half-smile, the closest he ever came to warmth. "But I will." Inside, the clinic smelled of antiseptic and coffee gone cold. The nurse at the desk barely looked up before calling for the next patient. While Hannah filled out paperwork, Deputy Sarah Lopez walked in. She was in her late 20s, tall and lean, her dark hair pulled back into a practical braid. The tan on her skin spoke of long days spent outdoors, patrolling back roads and ranch lines. Her brown eyes carried the kind of quiet that only came from seeing too much too soon. Sarah had grown up in Lander. Her father, also a deputy, had died in a standoff when she was 16, a mistake that had taught her not to trust first impressions. She'd learned to watch before she acted, and to question everything that looked too simple. When she saw Hannah's face, the bruises, the guarded posture, she paused. "You all right, ma'am?" "I'm fine," Hannah said quickly, eyes down. Sarah's gaze lingered a moment longer. Something in Hannah's tone didn't sound like fine. Jack came in just as Hannah was called to the exam room. He nodded politely to Sarah. "Deputy." "Mercer," she replied, recognition flickering. Everyone knew about the reclusive ex-SEAL who lived upriver. "Didn't think I'd see you in town." "Didn't plan to be." She studied him for a beat. The rough jaw, the eyes that seemed to carry a weight heavier than his years. Then she nodded and moved on. In the waiting area, a TV mounted on the wall played the midday news. Jack poured, himself, coffee from the machine. Ranger waited outside the door, head resting on his paws. The newscaster's voice was calm, detached, until a name froze Jack mid-sip. Authorities continue to search for Hannah Cole, wanted for questioning in connection with missing funds from the Cole Ranch estate. He looked up. On the screen, Hannah's photo appeared. The same face now sitting in the exam room. The caption beneath it read, "Wanted, Cole Ranch Theft Investigation." Jack's pulse tightened. He turned toward the hallway just as Hannah stepped out, pale and wide-eyed, staring at the screen. Her hands trembled. Before either could speak, the clinic's front door swung open. Travis Cole filled the doorway. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a tan ranch coat and a silver-buckled belt that screamed money and arrogance. His hair was dark blonde, cut neat, and his beard trimmed to look rugged but clean. His smile, though, carried the sharpness of a blade. "Well, I'll be damned," he drawled, "if it isn't the runaway herself." Two men followed behind him, ranch hands by the look of their boots and the weight of the pistols under their jackets. Hannah took a step back. "Travis," he held up a hand, "save it. You stole from family, Hannah. Now you think hiding with some vet will clean your slate?" The nurse at the counter froze, eyes darting between them. Whispers rippled through the small crowd of patients. In a place like Lander, truth was whatever story got told first, and Travis had been telling his for weeks. Sarah stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "Mr. Cole, Maybe we keep this civil. Travis shot her a glance. Just bringing a fugitive to justice, deputy. Doing your job for you. Jack stepped between them, his presence quiet but unyielding. You don't touch her. Travis sneered. And who the hell are you? Someone who doesn't like bullies. The tension thickened. Ranger, hearing his master's tone from outside, began to bark, low and threatening. Sarah's hand hovered near her holster. All right, everyone, take a breath. Her gaze flicked to Hannah. You want to tell me your side, Ms. Cole? But Hannah couldn't speak. Her lips trembled, her breath shallow. She looked trapped, not by law, but by memory. Travis took a step closer, lowering his voice just enough for Hannah to hear. You should have stayed buried with him. You always bring trouble. That was enough for Ranger. The German shepherd burst through the open door, growling, teeth bared. The crowd gasped, backing away. Ranger! Jack's command stopped the dog inches from Travis. Ranger froze, still growling, muscles coiled. Jack turned to Hannah. We're leaving. Travis opened his mouth to protest. But one look from Jack, and the cold gleam in the ex-SEAL's eyes, silenced him. Sarah exhaled slowly, stepping aside but not without a warning. Mercer, you bring her in if she's guilty. Otherwise, I'll find you myself. Jack met her gaze. If she's guilty, you won't have to. He guided Hannah out the door. Ranger followed, tail stiff, ears back. That night, back at the cabin, the fire burned low. The air smelled of rain again. Hannah sat at the table, her hands clutching the locket. He wasn't lying about everything, she whispered. Jack waited. My husband, his brother, was a drunk, mean. Died in a fight over money that wasn't even ours. After he was gone, Travis said I owed his debts. Said if I didn't sign over the land, he'd make sure everyone thought I stole it. Her voice broke. He didn't need proof, just words. Jack stared into the fire, jaw tight. And you ran. She nodded, tears streaking down her face. Because I knew no one would believe me. Outside, Ranger shifted near the window, standing guard as if the threat could already be seen. Jack reached over, sliding a mug of tea toward her. You're not running anymore, he said quietly. For the first time since she arrived, Hannah met his eyes and saw not pity, but understanding. The rain came back hard that week, drumming against the tin roof like a warning. The Wind River had calmed, but the air around Jack Mercer's cabin carried a weight that wasn't weather. Every night since Lander, headlights had appeared on the ridge and then vanished. Jack sat by the window, watching the dark. His jaw was tight, the faint stubble on his cheeks catching the glow of the fire. He hadn't shaved in days. Ranger slept near the door, tail twitching now and then, a soldier dreaming of duty. Hannah Cole sat at the table, her fingers tracing the rim of an untouched mug. The bruises on her face had begun to fade, but fear still lived behind her eyes. Travis won't stop, she said quietly. He'll find a way to twist everything. Jack looked over. He already tried. Didn't work. She gave a hollow laugh. He owns half that town. People believe money before they believe truth. Ranger suddenly lifted his head, ears forward. He rose, padded toward the far wall, and sniffed along the floorboards, his nails clicking softly. Then, without warning, he began pawing at the floor near the old stove. Jack frowned. What is it, boy? Ranger kept digging, nose pressed to the wood, growling low. Hannah stood, startled. Is something under there? Jack grabbed a crowbar from the workbench and knelt beside the dog. The wood creaked under his weight. With one sharp motion, he pried up a loose plank. Beneath it, a small metal box sat in the dust. The edges rusted, the latch sealed with tape. He exchanged a glance with Hannah. This wasn't mine. Her hands trembled as he cut through the tape. Inside were papers, yellowed deeds, faded letters, and a thumb drive tucked in a plastic sleeve. The smell of oil and metal filled the room. Jack plugged the drive into his old laptop. The screen flickered. Then a grainy black and white video began to play. A barn interior. Two men arguing beside a table stacked with envelopes. The camera shook slightly, hidden in the rafters. Jack turned up the volume. The voices were muffled, but clear enough. "You can't just take it, Travis," one man shouted. The camera shifted. Jack froze. The man speaking was younger, rough-faced, unshaven. Silas Cole, Hannah's husband, the one everyone believed had died in a drunken brawl. "Take it?" Travis barked back, his voice unmistakable. "You already lost it. You're drunk, Silas. You'll drink the ranch away before sunrise." There was a scuffle, a flash of movement. Silas stumbled backward, hitting his head on a support beam. The sound was sickening. Travis looked down at him, panic flashing across his face. Then calculation. He grabbed a wad of cash from the table and shoved it into his coat. "You fell," Travis muttered. "You were drunk." Then he looked directly toward the hidden camera. Jack paused the video. The room was silent except for the rain. Hannah's face was ashen. "That's it. That's the night he died." Jack exhaled slowly. "And the night he made you the villain." She buried her face in her hands. "He said no one would believe me, that he'd make sure they saw what he wanted them to see." Jack studied the screen again, his expression cold. "Then we'll show them something else." By the next morning, the storm had eased, leaving the forest dripping and gray. Jack picked up the phone and called Deputy Sarah Lopez. She arrived 2 hours later in her patrol SUV, her uniform damp from the rain. Sarah carried herself with quiet confidence, but today her jaw was clenched tighter than usual. She had pulled her dark hair into a bun, and the small silver cross on her chain glinted against her tan skin. Jack met her outside. "Thanks for coming. You said it was important." Her eyes flicked toward the cabin. "She's in there?" He nodded. "And so's the truth." Inside, Sarah stood beside the table as Jack replayed the video. Her face stayed unreadable, though her eyes darkened when Travis appeared on screen. When it ended, she exhaled sharply and rubbed her forehead. "This," she started, then stopped. "You know what happens if I take this to the sheriff? Travis's family funds half the department." "I figured," Jack said evenly. "That's why I called you, not him." Sarah paced, boots thudding softly on the wood floor. She looked from Hannah, pale, trembling, clutching the locket, to Jack and Ranger standing silently by the window. "Do you have any idea what this means?" she asked. "Yeah," Jack replied. "It means she stops running." Sarah hesitated. She'd joined the force to make things right after her father's death. A botched raid where a rich man's son walked free. For years, she'd promised herself she wouldn't let power bury truth again. Finally, she nodded. "All right, we do it by the book, but it's gonna get loud." Jack's lips curved slightly. "I've lived through loud." That afternoon, Lander's main street was busy. Ranch trucks, tourists, the usual gossipers outside the diner. Travis Cole stood near the bank, laughing with a group of men, his hat tilted back, his voice carrying over the crowd. When the county SUV pulled up, no one paid much attention, until Sarah Lopez stepped out, her badge gleaming in the noon light. She moved with purpose, her tone sharp as she said, "Travis Cole." He turned, grin fading. "Deputy, what brings you so? You're under arrest for fraud, obstruction of justice, and the murder of Silas Cole." The street fell silent. "What the hell are you talking about?" he snapped. "You've lost your mind!" Sarah signaled to the deputy beside her, a young officer named Dylan Reed, lanky, freckled, nervous, but loyal. Dylan stepped forward with handcuffs. "Evidence says otherwise," Sarah replied. "We have footage." People began murmuring. Travis's face flushed red. "You can't." "I can," Sarah cut him off. "And I will." As Dylan cuffed him, the crowd parted. Hannah stood across the street with Jack and Ranger. Her hands shook as she watched the man who had stolen her life finally lose his smile. For a long moment, their eyes met. The predator and the prey, roles reversed. Sarah nodded once toward Jack. "It's over." Jack gave a faint, grim smile. "Not for her, but it's a start." Travis was loaded into the SUV, shouting threats that no one believed anymore. When the dust settled, the whispers began. The same mouths that once called Hannah a thief now calling her poor woman, the one who was right all along. For the first time in years, Hannah didn't look afraid. Ranger wagged his tail once, pressing his head against her hand. She smiled through tears and whispered, "Good boy." The wind from the mountains carried the scent of rain and freedom, and as Sarah drove away with Travis in the back seat, Jack watched the road fade into the distance, knowing that sometimes justice didn't roar. It whispered, steady and undeniable, like the river that had brought them together. Weeks passed before the town of Lander stopped whispering Hannah Cole's name. At first, the stares followed her everywhere, some curious, some ashamed. But over time they softened into nods of respect. The court had ruled in her favor. The video evidence was irrefutable. Travis Cole was charged with manslaughter, fraud, and obstruction of justice, awaiting trial in a county jail 2 states away. The people who once called Hannah a thief now left flowers on the courthouse steps after every hearing. Justice had come, but peace was slower. Jack Mercer spent most of those weeks fixing fences for neighbors, helping ranchers dig out from spring floods, anything to keep his hands busy. His beard had grown thick, the gray at his chin more visible now, and though he worked with the same quiet focus, the old solitude didn't feel like it used to. He'd grown used to hearing another voice in the cabin, to Ranger's bark mingling with a woman's laughter. He wasn't sure when the silence had stopped feeling safe and started feeling empty. Deputy Sarah Lopez visited sometimes, in uniform, though she always parked her SUV far from the cabin, like she didn't want to bring the noise of the world with her. Her dark braid was shorter now. She'd cut it off the day she testified against her own department, exposing how Travis's money had silenced previous complaints. Her brown eyes, once guarded, now carried a steady kind of pride. She'd been suspended pending review, but she said it with a half smile. "It's worth it," she told Jack. "If I lose the badge, I'll just wear a different kind of honesty." One afternoon, she brought him an envelope from the county. "They're rebuilding the search and rescue unit," she said. "They need someone who can handle K-9 training and field ops. You're their first choice." Jack read the letter, the official seal smudged with rain. "You think I should do it?" "I think you already are," Sarah said, nodding toward Ranger, who sat obediently at Jack's heel, tail thumping once, eyes alert and loyal. You just need to stop pretending you're not built for saving things. She drove off before he could answer. Inside the cabin, Hannah was at the stove, humming softly as she stirred a pot of stew. The faint scent of thyme and smoke filled the air. She'd grown stronger, sun touching her skin again, and her dark hair, once tangled and dull, now shone against the light from the window. When she smiled at him, the lines of exhaustion that had once marked her face seemed to fade. "You look like someone handed you a decision you don't want to make," she teased gently. He leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. "They want me to train the new search and rescue team. I told them I was done with that life." Her eyes softened. "You say that about every life before the next one begins." He almost smiled. "You sound like you've been reading fortune cookies." "No," she said quietly, stirring the pot. "I've just lived through enough endings to recognize when one's really a beginning." That evening, the sky broke open into gold and crimson. The three of them, Jack, Hannah, and Ranger, walked down the familiar trail to the river. The ground was soft beneath their boots, wildflowers sprouting along the banks where floodwater had receded. The air carried the smell of pine sap and wet stone. The Wind River no longer raged the way it had that night. It moved with a low, steady rhythm, glinting under the late sun. Ranger bounded ahead, splashing into the shallows, barking at his reflection before chasing it downstream. Hannah laughed, the sound light and real this time. She crouched near the water's edge, letting the cold current slip through her fingers. "You know," she said, "I used to think rivers only took things away. But maybe they also give back what you lose, just in a different form." Jack stood beside her, hands in his jacket pockets, watching the water. "You're talking about second chances." She looked up at him. "I'm talking about staying." He met her gaze. The sunset painted her eyes green and gold, and for a moment he saw her not as the broken stranger he'd pulled from the river, but as the anchor he never knew he needed. He knelt beside her, close enough to see the small scar near her temple, the one she no longer tried to hide. "If I stay," she whispered, "will you?" The wind moved through the pines, soft and endless. Jack took her hand, his calloused fingers closing around hers. "For as long as you'll have me," he said. Ranger trotted up, shaking water all over them, tail wagging like a flag of victory. Hannah laughed, brushing droplets from her hair. Jack's smile came slow, deep, one of those rare ones that reached his eyes. They stood there together, watching the light fade, until the river became a ribbon of silver beneath the dusk. Far in the distance, thunder rolled across the mountains, not the threat of a storm, but the low, steady reminder that nature never truly rests. Jack glanced at the horizon, a flicker of something unreadable passing through his eyes. "You hear that?" he murmured. Hannah nodded, though her gaze stayed on the water. "It's just the wind." But Jack wasn't sure. Behind them, Ranger lifted his head, ears pricked toward the darkening forest. For a heartbeat, he let out a quiet growl, barely audible but enough to stir the air. Then he sat back down, watching the tree line as if waiting for something. The river kept flowing, calm and endless, as the first stars began to bloom in the sky. And for now, just for now, peace held.